by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's it's a heinous crime. People are so shocked
By scratching the surface of the royal household, you immediately get a terrible shock, because beneath the polished veneer lies a reality that many would consider a heinous crime against family unity. People across the nation are profoundly shocked by what Kensington Palace did, falling completely silent not because of the scandal shouted in public spaces, but because of one single, devastating order delivered behind closed doors with high-level lawyers watching every single word. Prince William, calm but visibly hardened by years of shifting dynamics, ordered Camilla's sister to leave Kensington Palace immediately after senior legal advisors officially confirmed she had no standing, no constitutional authority, and absolutely no protected right to remain within the private royal space that William has always considered deeply sacred. To understand what this really means for the crumbling architecture of the royal family, one must look at how William did not even raise his voice during the confrontation. He did not need to, because the prince stood firmly in a private room inside Kensington Palace, with the official legal file placed squarely before him, and every single person present in that room understood that his silence was heavier than any public announcement could ever be. Kensington Palace, a historic royal residence long connected to senior members of the family, mattered immensely because it was not just a collection of brick gates, ancient walls, and guarded corridors. For William, it was the absolute center of his private family life, a sanctuary tied directly to the sacred memory of his late mother, Princess Diana, the delicate recovery of Catherine, and the future that his 3 children would one day inherit from him. That was precisely why the eviction order cut so deep into the royal household, as it was never merely about physical access to property, but about total control, absolute protection, and drawing an iron line between a private family space and outside influence. Camilla felt the massive shock waves of this decision before the full wording of the legal notice had even reached her private quarters. The queen consort understood instantly that this was not just a direct attack on her royal title, but a move that struck dangerously close to her heart and her personal network within the palace walls. Her sister had originally been allowed temporary access to the residence through quiet, informal family arrangements, the exact kind of convenient arrangement that works perfectly fine only while everyone pretends it carries no political meaning or underlying authority. But Prince William no longer saw it as a harmless family favor, because he began to see familiar rooms being treated like open, unprotected territory where outside influences could wander freely. He noticed the palace staff growing increasingly uncertain about who could enter, who had the right to ask sensitive questions, and who truly belonged within that inner circle. That uncertainty mattered enormously because royal households survive entirely on clear, unbreakable boundaries, and once those boundaries begin to blur, institutional loyalty quickly turns into dangerous confusion, and confusion inevitably becomes a security risk. The lawyers confirmed this crucial point with a brutal, professional calm that left no room for emotional appeals. The private access arrangements clearly gave William sole authority over the specific spaces in question, and Camilla's sister possessed absolutely no protected legal right to remain there. A senior legal advisor, speaking strictly from the written file rather than relying on common palace gossip, made it undeniable that the permission granted in the past had never been permanent, never ceremonial, and never equal to official household status. William listened to the legal briefing without a single interruption. Then he placed one firm hand on the folder, looked toward the doorway, and stated coldly that the departure must happen before evening. The sentence landed in the room like a heavy iron door closing, and absolutely no one mistook it for a negotiation or a plea for compromise. Camilla's sister absorbed the sudden decision in stunned stillness, and the prince watched her carefully, almost sadly, as if he knew the immense pain of this action would travel straight to the queen consort, yet he did not soften the order by even a fraction. William had finally reached a point where further restraint no longer felt like patience, but felt exactly like a total surrender of his home. Before anyone could fully understand why William moved with such cold, unwavering certainty, the palace had to brace itself to face the people caught inside the blast radius of this monumental decision. The unexpected removal order cut through the daily routine of the royal household like a sharp blade, because it was not aimed at a complete stranger, but touched Camilla, her sister, King Charles, William, and Catherine all at the exact same time, behind the polished wooden doors of Kensington Palace. This was no longer a simple matter of guest rooms, visiting hours, or palace protocol, but instantly became a brutal family reckoning where blood ties, royal rank, and old, unhealed wounds collided without an ounce of mercy. Camilla understood the sheer cruelty of the moment immediately, knowing her sister was not some distant visitor passing to the edges of royal life, but had long belonged to the queen consort's most trusted private world, sitting close enough to be present during sensitive family conversations and being seen by the staff as an essential part of Camilla's emotional support circle. That was the exact reason why William's order carried such immense force, because it signaled to everyone inside the palace that personal closeness to the queen did not create automatic royal authority, and affection did not open every restricted door. For Camilla, the humiliation was not only that her own sister had been asked to leave so abruptly, but the deeper, more painful wound was that the decision reminded the entire household in the coldest possible way that her family's place inside the monarchy still depended entirely on permission from the true heirs. William saw the entire matter from a completely different perspective, and that fundamental difference made the escalating crisis impossible to soften or manage through public relations. Kensington Palace was not simply another royal address on a piece of stationery to him, but it was the very place where he had built his hard-fought independence from King Charles's household, the private domain where Catherine had fought bravely for calm during her health battles, and the precise place where their children were meant to feel absolutely protected from the unending storm surrounding the British crown. The prince strongly believed that once informal access became normalized, institutional boundaries would begin to weaken permanently, leading to a situation where staff would hesitate to enforce rules, aides would whisper in the corridors, and family arrangements would slowly turn into unvetted political influence. For a future king already carrying the immense weight of royal duty, that was a risk he could no longer accept under his roof. Every single royal crisis in history possesses one specific hidden moment that later feels completely impossible to ignore or brush aside under the rug of palace public relations. For Prince William, that breaking point officially came during a private family dinner held inside the walls of Kensington Palace, when a seemingly casual and small conversation crossed a dangerous, invisible line that had been drawn for generations. What had originally begun as a polite, quiet family evening meant to ease growing tensions instead became the ultimate emotional trigger that permanently hardened William's judgment, deeply unsettled Catherine, and convinced senior palace legal advisors that informal private access had transformed into something far more volatile. Catherine sensed a structural shift in the room long before anyone explicitly named it or put it into words, as the dinner had been meticulously arranged as something entirely harmless on the surface. It was supposed to be a private family gathering designed to bridge the widening gap between the two households rather than widen it further. But the seating arrangement placed Camilla's sister remarkably close to Catherine. She was close enough for her soft, casual remarks to carry an unintended political weight, and close enough for every single sudden pause in her sentences to feel deeply personal and pointed. At first, the dinner table conversation moved with extreme caution, touching lightly on safe topics such as daily family routines, upcoming palace movements, and a notoriously difficult balance between demanding public duty and private family life. But Kensington Palace was never just another historic address on a map to William or Catherine, because it held the living memory of past grief, the quiet strength of a family trying desperately to protect itself from the invasive noise of the British crown, and a sacred history that could not be rewritten. William listened in silence much longer than he actually wanted to, his expression remaining completely unreadable as the prince heard explicit remarks about future major royal events, potential internal household structural arrangements, and the apparent need to make private spaces feel far more modern, open, and accessible to the extended family. Those words may have sounded perfectly polished and well-intentioned to an outside observer, but to his ears, they carried a much sharper and more threatening undercurrent. Some of the specific private rooms being casually discussed for modern adjustment were directly connected to the sacred memory of his late mother, Princess Diana, and that detail mattered immensely, because Diana was not merely a tragic figure from a distant past to him. She remained the absolute emotional foundation of William's life, and she was a massive part of the reason why he guarded the strict boundaries of Kensington Palace so fiercely against any outside encroachment. Catherine understood that deep-seated emotional reality without William needing to utter a single word across the table, as she felt the entire atmosphere in the room shift dramatically the exact moment those private, historical rooms were treated like common spaces to be adjusted by people who had never carried their specific family pain. Camilla's sister did not seem to realize how far the boundaries of proper conversation had been breached, continuing to speak confidently as though her close personal relationship with the queen consort could naturally and automatically bring her family deeper into Kensington's private world during future state occasions. That was the exact ultimate trigger for William. Not a loud shout, not an explosive public scandal, but a single calculated sentence and a subtle suggestion that Camilla's extended family should be treated as an official part of Kensington's inner household when complex royal events demanded logistical coordination. Catherine grew entirely still as she processed the words, and William noticed the immediate change in her face, setting down his wine glass with a terrifying slowness that allowed an icy silence to do what raw anger would have completely ruined. No one at that dinner table dared to continue speaking after that, and William made his final executive decision immediately after the guests had departed the property. The prince called his senior staff and demanded the immediate retrieval of the official palace access records, not as a temporary gesture of suspicion, but as a firm legal demand for total organizational clarity. By the early hours of the next morning, top legal advisors were already meticulously reviewing exactly who possessed written permission to enter the restricted sections of the palace. The private access record, which is the official internal document showing who can move through highly restricted household areas, instantly became the central piece of evidence in a rapidly escalating crisis that no one in the royal family could now pretend was accidental. That single family dinner did not cause an immediate explosion in the press, but it placed a definitive legal clock beneath the foundation of Kensington Palace, and William was the only one listening to it tick toward zero. When the final legal answer from the lawyers arrived on his desk, William no longer wanted written explanations from a file, but he wanted the entire matter confronted face-to-face without delay. The intense confrontation did not begin with dramatic shouting or theatrical anger, but began with William standing rigidly beside a highly polished wooden table, his hand resting firmly near the heavy folder provided by the family lawyers, while Camilla's sister entered the room, expecting standard royal courtesy and pleasantries. What she found instead was a future king who had already made his final, non-negotiable decision, causing the air in the room to tighten instantly as a chair was moved into place and the heavy doors were closed, turning Kensington Palace into the ultimate stage for a private royal rupture. William watched the room settle into a heavy, suffocating silence that said far more than any public palace announcement ever could. The prince had absolutely not called this emergency meeting to debate personal feelings, air out petty grievances, or soften a harsh truth with additional royal politeness and diplomatic language. He had called it because a definitive legal answer regarding property rights and household authority had arrived, and once that line was crossed, further delay became completely impossible for his administration. Camilla's sister entered the room firmly, believing the entire situation could still be easily explained away as a minor logistical confusion, perhaps even handled quietly as an awkward, trivial family misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a personal apology. But the physical presence of two senior estate lawyers and one high-ranking household aide changed the entire dynamic of the room in a single second, signaling that this was not a casual, private complaint from a frustrated stepson, but a formal, institutional household decision with full legal backing. The purpose of the meeting was brutal and absolute in its clarity. Her continued presence and informal movement inside the walls of Kensington Palace would no longer be permitted under any circumstances. Camilla's sister tried her best to remain composed and maintain her dignity, but her composure began to slip the exact moment William spoke. He did not address her as an extended family member protected by the warmth of close emotional ties to the king, but he addressed her strictly as an outside individual who existed completely outside the household's formal legal structure. That profound difference mattered immensely because royal residences do not run on emotional familiarity, personal affection, or family status, but they run entirely on strict written permission, high-level security clearance, and absolute legal authority. A household legal structure means the official, unbreakable rules that strictly decide who belongs inside private royal spaces, who may enter restricted rooms containing sensitive documents or historical artifacts, and who ultimately answers to the specific individuals responsible for the daily safety and operation of that residence. William understood the immense, undeniable power of that specific legal wording, and Camilla's sister understood the deep humiliation hidden inside it, realizing she had not merely been corrected or given a polite warning, but she had been placed completely outside the inner circle of the future monarchy. William kept his voice perfectly controlled and steady throughout the entire meeting, but that control did not translate to softness or room for negotiation. The prince stated with absolute certainty that Kensington Palace was not an extension of anyone else's private influence, and his words carried the heavy weight of years of suppressed frustration. He had watched boundaries loosen in small ways over the years, then in much larger ways after transition to crown, watching common courtesy turn into an expectation, and watching that expectation slowly begin to look like an unearned entitlement. Camilla's sister sat across from him in total silence, absorbing the devastating meaning of his words, while the lawyer standing beside the file confirmed aloud that the eviction order had been thoroughly reviewed, proving that William's authority over the relevant private access arrangements was legally unassailable and secure. The final sentence left absolutely no shelter for compromise or negotiation, and the most devastating moment of the entire meeting came when William calmly slid the written legal notice across the polished table. No one reached out to touch the paper at first, as Camilla's sister looked down at the document as though touching it would make the terrifying decision permanent and irreversible, while the prince kept his hands perfectly still, refusing to rescue anyone in the room from the heavy, suffocating silence. Even the senior aide did not dare to interrupt the moment, as the room became a tense test of psychological strength to see who would accept the new order of the monarchy first. Camilla's sister finally understood that the door had already been firmly closed before she had even walked into the room, and that William had not come to threaten her, but he had come to enforce a new law. The true structural power behind Prince William's decisive operational move was still waiting to be fully revealed to the wider royal household and the watching world outside the palace walls. The eviction order may have sounded deeply personal and reactionary to those on the surface, but the cold internal machinery running behind it proved that William's final decision possessed roots that went far deeper than temporary anger or personal dislike alone. What ultimately made the legal document so devastating was not William's unyielding tone during the face-to-face meeting, but was the undeniable fact that senior lawyers confirmed he possessed the absolute constitutional authority to enforce it without requiring the king's signature. High-level palace influence, internal family pressure, and desperate emotional pleading from Camilla all collapsed completely against the exact same cold, immovable legal conclusion. Kensington's private access arrangements rested entirely with William's sovereign authority as the Prince of Wales, and in that definitive moment, King Charles discovered that even as a reigning monarch, he could not easily undo or reverse a structural boundary his eldest son had legally secured to the household administration. Charles read the comprehensive legal summary provided by the attorneys in complete silence, and a heavy quiet around him in his private study became almost unbearable for his aides to witness. The king had originally entered the family matter believing there might still be a softer, more diplomatic route available to explore. Perhaps a private correction, a discreet administrative compromise, or something temporary that would protect Camilla from public embarrassment while allowing William to feel heard and respected as the heir. But the explicit words printed black on white on the page left very little space for personal comfort or fatherly intervention, as the official household access rules placed the legal power firmly around William's primary residence. Kensington Palace was not simply another interchangeable palace corridor in a wider, sprawling royal machine, but it was his family's heavily guarded center, and that unique legal status made the eviction decision stronger than any passing emotion. William did not look victorious or triumphant when the final signatures were completed, and that was precisely what made the moment more painful for everyone involved in the crisis. The prince had won the intense legal argument hands down, but he carried the emotional weight of it like a man who knew that structural victory could still deeply wound the people he had to work with every single day. The lawyers explained thoroughly to the king that Camilla's formal position as queen consort did not automatically give her extended family members legal rights or permanent access inside William's private domain. That specific constitutional detail mattered immensely because it separated personal affection from official institutional authority, meaning Camilla could stand directly beside Charles at the very heart of the state monarchy, yet her sister could still be left completely outside the line William had drawn. In royal life, personal closeness often looked like power, but here, the law said otherwise, and Charles removed his glasses and placed them beside the folder without uttering a single word. The The silent gesture said exactly what the king could not bring himself to speak aloud, as he understood that trying to reverse his son's order to expose the fragile web of informal access arrangements the palace had quietly tolerated for years. Those sloppy arrangements had allowed unvetted people to move through private spaces simply because no one wanted to make a public scene. But now, the scene had arrived anyway, and silence became much safer than active resistance. The emotional fallout reached Camilla in private, and she did not rage or shout when the final reality reached her. Instead, she sat alone after the heavy door closed, her face completely drained of its usual public control. The order against her sister had become a permanent boundary drawn after years of quiet discomfort, and a staff member later described the most painful moment in a private documented account, knowing that Camilla stood beside a closed door for several seconds after her sister had gone, as though waiting for anyone to come back and reverse the damage. But no one came. The ultimate turning point of this entire institutional crisis came without the presence of advisors, lawyers, or traditional courtiers, as William and King Charles finally stood completely alone in a private room. Father and son were stripped of their grand titles by the sheer weight of what had just happened under their roofs. And for once, the intense argument between them was not about protocol or public relations, but was about trust, memory, and the future of the crown. Charles wanted an immediate explanation, but more than that, he wanted a way back to family unity, needing William to explain why every single softer option, such as a quiet warning or a temporary pause, had been completely rejected by his household. William did not speak like an angry son defending a quick temper, but he spoke like a future monarch defending a sovereign line he believed had already been crossed too many times by outside influences. The prince made it beautifully clear that Kensington Palace was the emotional center of his family's safety, a place intimately tied to Catherine's peace, his children's protection, and Princess Diana's enduring presence in everything he tried to preserve. He feared that if he surrendered that boundary even quietly, the loss of control would not stop at one doorway, and Charles looked visibly wounded as he realized his son was trying to prevent his own household from being swallowed by pressure, politeness, and the fear of confrontation. By the next morning, the private rupture had escaped the palace walls, and the world saw one definitive image that defined the entire confrontation across Great Britain. A single front-page photograph of the Kensington Palace gates under a gray morning light became the ultimate symbol of a family drawing lines that the crown could no longer hide from the public. Palace communications tried to frame the entire matter as a routine residence protocol issue, but the public heard a much stronger message. They heard that William had drawn a boundary. Charles had not overturned it, and authority had run out for the extended family. In the end, the historic order was remembered because William proved that the next king would not allow private royal spaces to be absorbed by pressure, sentiment, or borrowed authority. The decision hurt and divided the family, but it clarified something the monarchy had avoided saying aloud for a generation. William returned to his duties with the calm of someone who had already paid the heavy emotional price, reviewing the revised access list and signing it without an ounce of ceremony, signaling that his era had already begun in waiting.